In today's video, we're going to talk about a popular retirement chart that a lot of people swear by, but there's a big problem. It's making people work years longer than they really need to. One thing I've noticed over the years as a financial advisor is that people are retiring way too late, all because they're mistakenly following bogus information like this chart that I'm going to show you. So in today's video, I'm going to go over this financial independence chart. I'll explain what it is, and I'll show you exactly why it's wrong, and then I'm going to show you far better strategies to use so that you can retire sooner than you thought. So let's get right into it. So what I've got here right now is this financial independence chart from 4Pillar Freedom, and it's a site where they have a bunch of simple retirement calculators and things like that. And so this is a grid that shows you how many more years you need to work before you can achieve financial independence. And basically what they do is they take your after-tax income and your spending, and based on those two variables, they show you how long it's going to take to build a retirement portfolio that's big enough to sustain your withdrawals for the rest of your life. And so some of the other major assumptions that go into it, it assumes that you start with zero savings. It uses a fixed 5% return on investments, which I think is a little strange and might be a bit conservative, but we'll get into that in a little bit. It assumes a 4% withdrawal rate in retirement, so it follows the 4% rule. And then based on those variables, it calculates how many years you need to save based on how much of your income that you set aside. So if you look at this chart and you go all the way over to where the person's earning $90,000 a year, if somehow you were only spending $20,000 a year, the chart suggests that you could more or less retire in 6 years. Okay. On the other hand, if you're earning $90,000 but you spend $85,000, so there's only that $5,000 gap, well, it's going to take you 60 years to retire. Now, you've probably seen this chart before. It's simple, it's easy to understand, and it makes one giant promise that it can tell you exactly how close you are to retirement. But here's the issue. It's wildly inaccurate. It uses completely unrealistic assumptions that simply, don't reflect anybody's actual retirement experience. And if you use something like this, unfortunately, it could cost you, years of working longer than you really need to. So first, let's break down the biggest flaws from this chart. And look, I'm sure that it surprises you that this widely known chart can actually set you back for retirement rather than help you. So if you are concerned about where your retirement plan is headed, click the first link in the description where you can fill out a short questionnaire that I put together. And after that, I'll send you a personalized video with some strategies to help you, hopefully retire on time. But now let's get back into the video and let's go over the specific failures of using a chart like this. So I put together what I think are 5 critical flaws in this chart, and understanding how these flaws impact your financial situation really could be the difference between retiring years earlier than you thought possible or maybe unnecessarily extending your working career. So the first critical flaw I see is that it ignores market cycles and inflation, which are 2 big ones. The market cycle thing is kind of hard to gauge because if you look at 10 and 20-year average returns, they can be drastically different, and it is hard to estimate for that. But let's say you are relatively young, you're in your 30s, assuming you're only going to earn 5% over time is pretty unrealistic, and in most situations, historically, you would have earned a lot higher than that. So that variable alone could make a huge difference on the outcome as far as how long you need to save. So I don't know why they used such a conservative number. Maybe if you're already like 60, that makes sense, but I don't know. So that was weird. Number 2 is inflation. So there's no mechanism to bake in inflation here. And if you earned 5% and only had 1% inflation versus 5% and, let's say 3% inflation, that would make a drastic difference in the outcome. Even though it's only 2%, your ending value would be way off, and you would probably run out of portfolio, or you would probably run out of assets years earlier if, with the higher inflation. Flaw number 2, it ignores Social Security and like other income sources, right? So most people have Social Security, and that amount is going to vary based on your earnings history. The second part of that is, some people do have pensions, and a lot of people actually have rental income from real estate. So you add those into the mix, and those income streams would also make a really big difference. Flaw number 3, it uses what I would call a rigid and outdated withdrawal strategy. So this is using the 4% rule. We talk about it a lot around here. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but I think if anybody's watched this channel, my opinions on it. And, plenty of studies show that there are far better withdrawal strategies to use. And 4% rule is pretty outdated, and it's not going to give you the best outcomes in general. Flaw number 4, it ignores the power of tax planning. And so this is huge, and the example that I'm going to show you guys later is going to kind of hammer this point home, but there's going to be a huge difference in your outcome depending on how you are able to kind of come up with a good tax strategy. And so, here again, this chart makes no mention of taxes, just says after-tax income right now. And so here too, you could shave years off of how long you need to retire if you're smart about tax planning. Flaw number 5, it fails to account for changing spending in retirement. This just assumes that your retirement spending just takes a linear path, and we also know that that is completely unrealistic. Retirees don't spend according to that kind of pattern. They actually spend according to a pattern called the retirement spending smile, which we'll get into later. But the point being here is you add those 5 up, and a chart like this is pretty useless. It's going to give you a very unrealistic answer that's almost certainly way too conservative. So now that you see the flaws in this chart, let me share a client example that hopefully helps reframe how you should be evaluating your retirement readiness and, could possibly accelerate your timeline in ways that you simply won't be able to do using charts like this or other kind of traditional retirement rules of thumb. So unlike traditional retirement charts that assume a rigid lifestyle and income needs, modern retirement success requires lifestyle design as part of the financial planning process. Freedom is going to come from creating flexible income streams and not just accumulating a specific number or working for a very specific number of years. And so what you really need to do is shift your focus from arbitrary savings targets to a strategy that aligns your money with your actual retirement needs. So what exactly does a retirement approach that prioritizes freedom over, static formulas look like in practice? Well, I break it down to there's 4 critical elements that I think you have to coordinate to get a really good lifestyle-based retirement plan. So what we're going to do, I'm going to go over the client example, and it's going to illustrate kind of perfectly how these elements work together to get you retired earlier than using these charts or rules of thumb. So this is a client, he's 54 years old, he's not married, and when he came to me, he kind of has this one-dimensional focus on accumulation rather than, a full lifestyle income type strategy. And, you see that a lot, right? Just because of most of the rules of thumb out there really do focus on accumulation. Now, the bulk of his savings was in 401k, roughly about 70%. And he's maxing out his 401k every single year. A couple of the issues, one, he has really no clarity on the retirement lifestyle and the associated costs that are going to come with it. He's just sort of assuming like, hey, I'm going to spend 80% of my current expenses that I have now working, I'm going to have that in retirement. And the other thing is he was just like, well, I'm guessing I'll be able to retire at age 65. And he really didn't know. And that was kind of one of the big reasons that prompted him to come. And that, again, is just one of these random things. There's no plan really involved there. It's just like, well, my mid-60s, that'll probably be the time that I need to retire. The other big thing for him was that he really did have a lot of anxiety about market volatility and that impacting his retirement date. So let's look at how did we implement a lifestyle-focused retirement plan and, how did that change his outlook, right? And I think the first thing you want to do is focus on lifestyle and not just savings, right? So the big change kind of came from shifting his mindset from, okay, how much do I need to save to how can I efficiently use what I've built? So the first thing you want to do is create a retirement lifestyle blueprint. Instead of just guessing at a big savings number, what we did is we first mapped out what his retirement would actually look like. And so when you get into it, you find out, okay, he actually plans on relocating to either Costa Rica or Panama. Well, that changes things quite drastically, as you can imagine. Just moving to a lower cost of living place. We'll get into some of the tax strategies later, but with some of the tax savings that we'll do, that lops off like $2,500 a month in expenses alone. And that even includes, we plan on him being able to travel back and forth between the US. There's a $10,000 budget for that as well. And he initially thought he's going to have to replace 80% of his pre-retirement income, but that turned out not to be the case at all. When we actually factored in the real numbers based on the lifestyle that he wanted, his expenses were like 25% lower than what he had assumed. And so piggybacking on that, number two, what we do is develop a multi-stage spending plan, and that's based on the retirement spending SMILE. So, I mentioned it earlier in my videos and we talk about it a lot around here, but studies will show that realistic spending patterns for retirees are pretty high in the beginning when you're active. They go down as you start to age, and then they go up a lot for healthcare related expenses. So we built his kind of retirement budget based around those types of patterns. They're far more realistic. So we had early retirement. That's where you got more travel, hobbies. We have mid-requirement, so 75 to 85, gradual decline. And then we've got the later years where we put in kind of big healthcare spending and long-term care type costs. Just making this shift alone adds like 2 years to his savings of how long it would last in retirement. And another way to look at that is, you can basically like retire a couple of years earlier. All right. And so number three, what you want to do is implement a tax optimized income strategy. So like I said earlier, for him, about 70% of his assets are in a 401k, which is a tax deferred account. And this means he's going to have high taxes in retirement. So instead of waiting to his required minimum distribution age, what we're going to do is shift more savings into his taxable brokerage and Roth IRA right now. So while he's still in his 50s, we're really going to hit the Roth conversion strategy hard. And this is another area that's really going to save him years off his retirement, because what's going to happen is now he's going to have more money in taxable brokerage and his Roth. And that's going to keep his taxable income lower, because while you're abroad and you're a resident of another country, you're still going to be taxed on your U.S. income. And, there are tax treaties and all that, and it's complicated, but you do want to kind of keep your income lower in the United States. And so by being able to utilize more like taxable brokerage assets and then Roth assets to keep his retirement income tax lower, that's going to be a big deal for him. And so we've got to start on that strategy now before he actually retires. The upshot was that this roughly is going to get him about 15% higher net income just by changing up the way that we deal with the tax strategy and withdrawals in retirement. So that's a big deal. Okay, last, what we want to do is build a dynamic withdrawal strategy that can handle market volatility. First of all, like I said, he's kind of worried about that. And the last thing you want to do is take, like a 50% loss and then puke, sell everything at the bottom, and miss out on a major part of the recovery. The second issue is something that we talk about a lot around here as well, and that's sequence of return risk. And the first 10 years of retirement are quite critical for that, and you definitely don't want to take major losses while you're drawing from your portfolio. So we need to design his withdrawal and income strategy so that he can withstand some market shocks, but also he can't be like too conservative, right? Because he's going to be young and his money has to last for, potentially decades. And so by having a dynamic withdrawal strategy, it's going to be a lot better than a rigid withdrawal strategy like the 4% rule. So there's a couple things we're going to do. First, we'll have a cash buffer. We're going to give him like a year's worth of expenses. That's going to be there. It's going to be earning just cash, and he's going to have that as a safety blanket. This is something that you might have heard of. It's called a bucket strategy. So that's one thing. And then we'll also have other income generating assets in his portfolio that are mostly going to meet his needs. Now, another big thing, and we've talked about this before too, we're going to use a guardrail strategy. So that means that we are going to change his withdrawals based on the values of his portfolio. So in good times, he's actually going to spend more. In bad times, he's going to have to tighten his belt a little, and we're going to know exactly what those thresholds are. The final aspect of protecting his portfolio is something called tail risk hedging, and it's a little bit complicated, and so I don't want to use too much jargon here, but essentially we're going to be buying crash insurance on his portfolio. We'll take a very small amount of his assets and we'll buy crash insurance premiums. Think of it as like buying homeowners insurance, right? You pay a premium every month, and then if your house burns down, you get a big payout for the value of the house. You can do the same thing with your portfolio. So we're going to be doing that. I would never go without homeowners insurance, and I think most people should not go without insurance on their portfolio either. And so we put these together, and that kind of eliminates Mark's fears of running out of money earlier, especially because he knows, okay, if it really comes down to another financial crisis, I've got a great plan in place. And he's going to be able to adapt to whatever kind of market fluctuations happen. So now with this kind of lifestyle-based plan in place, he actually didn't need to work till 65, right? What he's going to do is work until 58, which is 7 years sooner than what he expected, just by getting a kind of solid plan in place instead of just, relying on rules of thumb. So I think the key takeaway here is if your retirement plan is just save as much as possible, you're probably working longer than you need to. So if you can come up with, instead, a smart income strategy and more realistic spending plan, then you can get to retirement probably years earlier than you would think otherwise. Now, hopefully you understand why charts like the one I showed in the beginning of the video and other rules of thumb are kind of misleading at best and could be costing you years of your freedom at worst. And, instead, I suggest creating a lifestyle-focused retirement plan that I think is going to let you retire much earlier. And look, I know that implementing this into your retirement plan can be overwhelming because there are so many moving parts. So if you want a professional assessment of your current plan, click the first link in the description and you can fill out a short questionnaire that I put together. And after that, I'll send you back a short video where, I'll gauge your retirement readiness based on your responses. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.